There's a specific morning that happens to almost nobody, and almost nobody talks about it. It's not the morning you get married. It's not the morning you have a baby, or land the big promotion, or walk across a stage. It's the morning your number finally clears. The number that means you never technically have to work again for the rest of your life. And here's the part nobody warns you about that morning. Nothing happens. No confetti falls. No one calls you. Your coffee tastes exactly the same as it did yesterday. You just quietly stop being trapped. And the world keeps moving like it never noticed. Meet Daniel, 37 years old, IT project manager. Lives just outside Denver, in a 2-bedroom townhouse he's been meaning to repaint for 6 years now. For 14 years, Daniel did something almost nobody around him understood. While his coworkers financed new SUVs and argued about which credit card gave the best travel points, Daniel quietly put 32% of every paycheck into the same 3 index funds. He drove a 2013 Honda Accord through 2 promotions. He packed lunch from home so consistently that people at the office started joking about Daniel's Tupperware. Nobody called it a strategy. Most people just called it cheap. In Daniel's head, it had a different name. He called it the exit. On a Tuesday in March, at 9:14 in the morning, Daniel's brokerage app refreshed and showed him a number he'd run in a spreadsheet roughly 400 times over the past decade. $1,300,000. 25 times his yearly expenses. The number that, by every retirement rule on the internet, meant he was financially free. He sat there holding his phone for almost a full minute. Then his laptop chimed. Stand-up meeting in 4 minutes. And Daniel did something he still can't fully explain, even now. He put the phone face down on the counter, opened his laptop, and joined the call. If you'd asked 28-year-old Daniel what this exact moment would feel like, he would have described something close to euphoria. Instead, it felt like nothing. Just a slightly heavier phone in his pocket on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. So, here's the real question. Not, how do you build wealth? Daniel already answered that one, the boring way, over 14 years. The real question is this. If crossing the finish line doesn't feel like winning, what was the race actually for? There's a name for what happened to Daniel that morning, and psychologists have been studying it for over 20 years. Harvard researcher Tal Ben-Shahar calls it the Arrival Fallacy, the trap of believing that once you finally reach a goal you've chased for years, happiness will simply be sitting there waiting for you. Most of the time, it isn't. The gap between what you expected to feel and what you actually feel is the entire phenomenon. It gets worse. Psychologists Timothy Wilson and Daniel Gilbert found that human beings are consistently bad at predicting their own emotions. We overestimate how intense a future feeling will be, and we overestimate how long it will last. Daniel didn't fail to feel euphoric by accident. His brain had been running on a broken forecast for 14 years. There's a biological reason underneath it too. Brain imaging research on the reward system shows dopamine rising while we're actively chasing a goal, and dropping off almost the moment we actually reach it. The brain seems to be built to enjoy the hunt, not the catch. Think about what that means. The 2 a.m. spreadsheet checks. The packed lunches. The version of Daniel constantly calculating and recalculating, that wasn't just the price he paid to get free. That was the part of the process his brain was actually wired to enjoy. The number itself was simply where the chemical ran out. So Daniel didn't fail to feel free. He felt exactly what 14 years of behavioral science predicted he would feel. Nothing. Because the finish line was never where the reward lived in the first place. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the arrival fallacy explains the silence inside Daniel's own head. It doesn't explain the silence from everyone else. 3 days later, Daniel finally told his boss. He'd rehearsed the conversation in the shower. He expected shock. Maybe a counteroffer. At least a long pause. What he actually got was, "Oh, cool. Are you thinking full remote, or are you actually stepping away?" Then his boss glanced at his own calendar and asked if Daniel could still cover Thursday's client call. That was it. That was the entire reaction to 14 years of quiet discipline. And this is where Daniel almost made a very common mistake. He almost talked himself into staying. Not because he needed the money. The spreadsheet was clear on that part. He almost stayed because leaving suddenly felt strange in a way he hadn't planned for. There's a name for this too, inside the online financial independence community. They call it one more year syndrome. People who hit their number on paper then quietly invent a fresh reason to stay every 12 months. A shaky market, a bonus cycle, one more cushion of safety. The math rarely backs it up either. An extra year of work on top of an already sufficient number usually adds somewhere around 3 to 5% to the total portfolio. Enough to notice. Almost never enough to be the actual difference between a plan that works and one that doesn't. So, if it's not about the math, what is it about? A UK study from the Institute of Economic Affairs found something that had nothing to do with money at all. Leaving the workforce was linked to a roughly 40% higher chance of clinical depression, and it wasn't driven by lost income. It was driven by lost identity, the structure, the title, the daily sense of being needed by something bigger than yourself. A separate study from Savant Wealth Management found the identical gap hiding one layer deeper. Fewer than half of retirees actually knew how they wanted to fill their days once work ended. More than half admitted they were quietly worried about finding any sense of purpose at all. Daniel had spent 14 years perfecting the answer to, "How do I afford to leave?" He had never once practiced the answer to, "Who am I when I'm not the guy grinding toward the number?" That gap between the size of the internal event and the size of the outside reaction is exactly where most people quietly get stuck. Some never actually leave the race. They just learn to run it more comfortably, forever. Here's the part that took Daniel almost 6 months to actually understand. It's the part nobody in the FIRE forums ever quite says out loud. Nobody noticed Daniel's exit. Not because his 14 years didn't matter. Nobody noticed because the entire system he'd been running inside of was never built to notice an exit at all. Think about every signal of success inside a career. The promotion, the raise, the title change, the corner office, the year-end bonus. Every single one of those signals exists to measure people who are still running. The system has no metric for stopped. It was never designed with a finish line because a finish line would mean people leaving, and the whole structure depends on nobody leaving. So when Daniel stepped outside of it, he didn't fail to get recognized. He simply stepped outside the only instrument that system had for measuring anyone at all. That's not a tragedy. That's actually quiet proof that it worked. The recognition Daniel kept waiting for was never going to come from the same machine he'd just spent 14 years quietly escaping. It wasn't built to reward leaving. It was built to reward staying. Which raises an uncomfortable follow-up question. If the recognition was never going to come from outside, where was Daniel supposed to get it from? This is the part most people skip entirely because they're too busy chasing the number to plan for the day after it. Real financial freedom doesn't announce itself, because it isn't a public event. It's a private subtraction. It's the absence of something, the alarm you no longer have to set for a job you no longer have to keep, the meeting you sit through out of choice instead of fear. Absence doesn't make noise. That's exactly why nobody claps for it. No one clapped. No one even knew. The sandwich didn't taste any different than it would have on a Saturday. But for the first time in 14 years, that ordinary Wednesday belonged entirely to him. And nobody had to notice that for it to be true. So, here's the question worth sitting with, whether you're 2 years into the race or 20. If you crossed your own finish line tomorrow and absolutely nobody noticed, would you still know you'd won?